After the funeral, rain fell in a relentless drizzle, turning the cemetery lawn to sticky mud that sucked at heels and dulled every footstep. The black-clad mourners huddled beneath shared umbrellas, their faces blurring into a sea of somber anonymity as the priest recited the final prayer. Emily stood a little apart from the cluster of her siblings and extended family, arms wrapped tight around herself. While sorrow pressed heavy on her chest, it wasn't just grief that left her numb, it was the sense that she didn't belong. Not really. Not among these people. Not even among her own sisters. From the corner of her eye, she could see them, Bridget and Veronica, impeccably dressed, faces perfectly composed. Bridget's mouth formed a hard, straight line, as though she were willing herself not to cry. Veronica dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, occasionally glancing around as though checking if anyone noticed her display. Even in mourning, they moved with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly where they stood in the world. Emily had never mastered that skill. The ceremony ended. People began to drift away, murmuring quiet condolences to their little circle. Most of these words never quite made their way to Emily. A few family friends offered awkward hugs before pulling back to join the larger, more animated crowd surrounding her sisters. Emily felt like a ghost hovering on the edge of her own story. She lingered by her father's grave. The dark, freshly turned earth made the headstone seem even starker. Somehow she'd always believed there'd be another chance, to fix what was broken, to say all the things that weighed on her heart. But now, as the crowd thinned and the world seemed quieter, she knew that moment would never come. Bridget's voice sliced through the hush, cool, authoritative. "Emily, we're meeting at the house to discuss a few things. Don't take too long." At that moment, Veronica's eyes flickered over her, just for a second, a look blending impatience, sympathy, and perhaps something colder. Emily nodded mutely, unable to summon words. As she watched her sisters lead the family away, her mind raced with unfinished conversations, hidden resentments, and vague fears of what would composure. Their eyes lingered on the polished oak doors if they could summon the lawyer through sheer expectation. Outside, the rain tapped a steady rhythm, muffled by the heavy curtains. At last the door opened, and Mr. Connolly entered, his suit slightly rumpled, glasses fogged from the damp. He offered each sister a shallow nod, clutching a thin briefcase to his chest, as though afraid someone might snatch it away.
"Thank you for coming on such short notice,"
he began, resting his case on the coffee table.
"Your father wanted things settled quickly. He was nothing if not decisive."
The lawyer attempted a smile, but it faltered when met with Bridget's icy stare. He withdrew a slim envelope and slid out a sheaf of papers.
"As per Mr. Stanton's last will, I will now read the terms."
Emily's heart lurched, fingers tightening. She barely remembered what her father had ever promised her, if anything. He'd always spoken in riddles, left questions hanging in the air with a half smile as if mystery were an inheritance in itself. Mr. Connolly read through a preamble, legal language, impersonal and unyielding. Then his voice steadied, solemn.
"To my daughters, I leave the entirety of my estate, divided as follows. Bridget and Veronica, you shall each receive a trust fund to be administered by the firm for your benefit."
He cleared his throat, glancing towards Emily.
"Emily Stanton shall inherit the family home, all properties in her name, and a controlling share in Stanton Holdings."
Silence shattered the room. Veronica's jaw dropped, her face blanching, before color rushed angrily to her cheeks. Bridget's mouth twitched, eyes narrowing, a flicker of disbelief quickly masked behind a curtain of indifference. Emily blinked, stunned. For years, she thought her name would barely be mentioned, maybe a token gift, a kind word. She never expected to inherit not just the house, but the company, the land, the legacy. The room seemed to tilt. Her sisters' gazes weighed on her like physical blows. Bridget finally broke the silence. "This must be some mistake."
Every syllable dripped frost. "I assure you," Mr. Connolly began, but Bridget cut him off. "Our father would have told us. He wouldn't just. This is absurd." Veronica laughed, brittle
Behind the formal words of a will, allies and enemies. Emily wandered the halls of the family home, feeling like a stranger in a museum built for someone else. The heavy portraits on the walls, her father young and stern, her mother laughing by a garden, seemed to watch her, as if waiting for her to speak or act wisely. She had inherited these images too, along with the creaking floors and ancient rugs, but none of their certainty had passed into her veins. Each step only deepened the ache of exile within her own home. Downstairs, voices echoed from the kitchen, Bridget's clipped and sharp, Veronica's high and agitated. They hadn't spoken to her since Mr. Connolly read the will, except in frosty monosyllables. She hesitated at the landing, listening. "I can't believe he'd do this," Veronica hissed. "Of all people, Emily?" "She can't handle it. She won't," Bridget insisted. "Not for long, anyway." Veronica's laugh was brittle. "We'll make sure of it." Emily's heart hammered in her chest, but instead of confronting them, she slipped quietly away, the silence closing around her like a second skin. Later, as twilight seeped through the old windows, Emily found herself in the backyard. The magnolia tree her mother planted nearly 2 decades earlier had blossomed early, scattering creamy white petals across the grass. She leaned against its trunk, drawing a shaky breath, fighting the sense of defeat creeping up her spine. "Thought I'd find you out here," a familiar voice called softly. Emily turned. At the gate stood Rachel, her oldest friend, practical, warm, and loyal to a fault. In her faded Yankees cap and mud-stained jeans, Rachel looked out of place against the somber backdrop of the house, yet she smiled with an easy confidence that soothed Emily's panic. Rachel hopped the fence and drew close, pulling Emily into a sideways hug. "How are you holding up, Em?" Emily almost laughed. It was easier than crying. "I think my sisters hate me." "Well," Rachel deadpanned, "they never liked you much to begin with." That Ruth would be fighting on her side. The first scheme. If the Stanton house had been somber before, now it simmered with a tension so sharp it felt dangerous. Beneath polite exchanges and brittle smiles, a storm brewed. One Emily could feel in the tremor of her sisters' voices and the careful way they watched her across the breakfast table. The next morning, Bridget and Veronica retreated behind the double doors of their father's old study. Emily heard the lock snick into place from down the hall. Muffled words rose and fell in heated bursts, their tone unmistakable even without the details. Disbelief, outrage, and, beneath it all, the notes of plotting. She paced the hallway outside, torn between the urge to burst in and demand the truth or shrink away unnoticed. In the end, she drifted toward the kitchen, trying to steady her hands as she made coffee. Her mind churned with uncertainty. The sisters emerged an hour later, their faces composed and their voices syrupy sweet. At breakfast, Bridget leaned over, fixing Emily with a gentle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've been thinking," Bridget began, laying her hand over Emily's as if confiding a loving secret. "Dealing with all these estate issues must be so overwhelming for you. There are a lot of legal papers and details, things you aren't used to managing." Veronica chimed in, her tone saccharine and false. "It might be best if we help. Just sign a few documents. Let us take some of the burden. Dad would have wanted us to support each other, don't you think?" Old habits tugged at Emily. The desire to be agreeable, to please, to trust her family. But Rachel's warning echoed in her mind, and she studied her sister's faces more closely, searching for any hint of sincerity. All she saw was calculation. Emily glanced at the thick stack of papers Bridget slid across the table, every page marked for her signature. With a flutter of unease, she skimmed the titles: Power of Attorney, Guardianship, Asset Transfer. Words swam on the page, unfamiliar and threatening. Her voice barely more than a whisper, she asked, "Why do you need me to sign these right now?" With the cooling coffee and a gathering sense of dread. She had no doubt. A line had been crossed. The sisters' alliance was no longer just a whisper behind closed doors. It was a threat with teeth. Emily understood now. If she made even a single mistake, they would be ready to strike. As the house fell quiet, Emily sat motionless, holding that single decision close to her heart. She might be afraid, but she would not make this easy for them. Legal trap. The days that followed unspooled in an uneasy blur. Emily found herself tiptoeing through her own life, wary of every interaction, the memory of the unsigned documents haunting her. Bridget and Veronica maintained their syrupy charm, but beneath it lurked a tightening impatience, the sense that Emily was failing to act her part in their carefully choreographed plan. On a gray Wednesday morning, the air thick with the threat of another storm, Bridget appeared at Emily's bedroom door with a new stack of folders. "Emily, we really can't keep the estate in limbo," she said, her tone balancing sternness and feigned concern. "There are deadlines, tax issues, legalities. You don't want the firm sending notices to the family lawyers, do you?" Emily studied her sister's expression. Bridget could be persuasive when she wanted. Her strength was always charm masquerading as rationality. "Let's review them together," Emily replied, her voice wary but even. Downstairs, the study had been transformed into a staging area. Legal pads, pens, glossy envelopes, and a pot of bracing coffee. Veronica was already there, tapping her fingers on the table, her smile tense. Bridget slid the first paper across. "This is just an authorization for the trust. It's procedural. The lawyer even said so." Emily hesitated, but fatigue and family pressure pressed in. "I still don't really understand all this," she admitted. Veronica's eyes softened, but it was a calculated kindness. "You've always trusted us," she whispered. "We're looking out for you and Dad's legacy. That's all." Emily forced a nod and signed the page, then the next, and the next, each attorney. "Once you sign, they'll be able to make decisions for you. And this gives away your voting rights in the company." Emily's pen hovered above the paper. Bridget tensed, ready to intervene, but it was too late. The mask had dropped, their intentions were laid bare. Veronica tried a last brittle plea. "We're family. We're just trying to keep this from getting messy." Emily pushed the papers away, her hand shaking. "I need a real lawyer. I'm not signing anything else until I understand what it means." The room crackled with silence. Frustration and anger flickered across her sisters' faces, no longer fully hidden. Something fundamental had shifted. Emily had awakened to the reality of their game, and with Rachel beside her, she finally had the courage to step out of their shadow. Later that night, as rain battered the windows, Emily sat awake with Rachel, sifting through the stack of documents her sisters had tried to slip past her. For the first time, she realized how close she'd come to losing everything. She made a silent vow. Never again would she sign away her life simply to keep the peace. A new resolve. The dawn after the legal ambush broke through heavy clouds, spilling pale gold across the Stanton estate. For the first time since her father's funeral, Emily woke feeling something other than dread. The night had been long, punctuated by Rachel's steady presence and the endless rustle of shuffling papers. But exhaustion had finally given way to a fragile sense of determination. She dressed in jeans and her softest sweater, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Downstairs the kitchen was quiet. No shiny smiles from Bridget, no clinking cups orchestrated by Veronica. Instead, the house was filled with the stillness of waiting. Emily made strong coffee and looked out the window as morning mist curled through the garden. Rachel appeared, hair still mussed from sleep. "You didn't sleep much," she said, pouring herself a cup. "I couldn't," Emily admitted. "But I know what I have to do now." Rachel grinned, a touch of mischief in her eyes. "Good, because I made initiative," Ms. Yates replied. "You're the legal heiress. You need to assert control. Let the firm, everyone involved with the company and the estate, know that nothing goes forward without your knowledge and consent." Outside, the day grew brighter, as if the world itself sensed her shift in momentum. Emily left the lawyer's office walking a little taller. She allowed herself a nervous but genuine smile. Back home, Bridget and Veronica were waiting, faces cool and expectant, as though nothing had happened. Emily met their eyes, no longer shrinking from their confidence. "I've hired my own lawyer," she announced, voice steady. "From here on, I'll make my own decisions. Negotiations, paperwork, everything. It goes through her first." Bridget's lips pursed. Veronica shot daggers with her gaze, but Emily didn't waver. "We're sisters," Emily added quietly. "But I won't be pushed around anymore. I won't give up what Dad left me, not for comfort, not for peace." The room pulsed with silent resistance, but Emily felt a quiet power blooming inside her, new, uncertain, but growing stronger with every heartbeat. She turned from her sisters and walked out to the garden, breathing in spring air, the tension of weeks melting off her shoulders. Maybe she still felt afraid, and maybe the war wasn't over. But for the first time in her life, she wondered what would happen if she fought for herself, and who she might finally become. Lines drawn. For the first time in weeks, the Stanton house felt different. Less like the stage for someone else's drama, more like the heart of Emily's own battle. The clean scent of lemon oil mingled with sunbeams pouring through the windows. There were no comforting illusions anymore. The boundaries had been set, and the war was no longer hidden in whispers and glances. In the parlor, Bridget and Veronica sat amid a fortress of their own, armed with laptops, legal pads, and phones buzzing with impatient energy. They barely looked up when Emily entered, but she felt the tension. "Attorney, as is my legal right." Veronica leaned forward, lips tight. "You think you can run all this? The board will eat you alive. Dad barely trusted you with the houseplants." Rachel's eyes flashed, but Emily didn't flinch. "You can doubt me all you want, but I'm staying, and I expect you both to keep communications clear and honest. If you want this to be a war, fine. If you want something else, now's your chance to say so." An uncomfortable silence settled. Bridget, always the diplomat, folded her hands and measured her words. "We both want what's best for this family. But you have to recognize that you're not experienced in business. The company is vulnerable with you at the helm." Emily's voice grew stronger, steadier with each word. "I'll learn. I'm not afraid of hard work or making mistakes. I'm not giving this up because it's uncomfortable for you." Across the table, her sisters exchanged a glance, one Emily couldn't quite read. It was a moment of recognition, grudging or not, that Emily had drawn her own line in the sand. The conversation shifted, sharp, sometimes biting, but suddenly real. Details emerged: Bridget's financial headaches, Veronica's social connections, Emily's gaps in knowledge. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was confrontation in the open. Afterward, as dusk spilled lavender and blue through the tall windows, Rachel squeezed Emily's hand beneath the table. "That was brave, Em. You forced them to see you as an equal." Emily felt old anxieties lifting, replaced by something like pride. "It's not over," she whispered. "But I think this is the first time I've felt ready for the fight." The lines were drawn. The battle for the Stanton estate was no longer an invisible game. And no matter what happened next, Emily knew she would never again let her voice be drowned out in someone else's house. Unexpected loyalty. Emily never expected her family's drama to have an audience, let alone participants beyond the tight circle of the Stanton sisters. Yet by the end of the week, the currents beneath the estate's polished surface were shifting in ways, carefully replanting violets by the fountain. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering before he nodded for her to sit on the low stone wall. "Thought you could use some air, Miss Emily," he rumbled, wiping earth from his hands. She couldn't help the tired smile. "That obvious, huh?" James leaned back, eyes fixed on the garden but voice pitched low. "Every soul in this house feels the tremors, same as a hard frost in spring. Trouble's old news around here, but this time it rides on different horses." Emily studied her hands, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know who to trust. It's like I'm fighting alone." James shook his head, slow and deliberate. "You're not. Not really." He paused, voice softer. "Your father, when he was alive, asked me to watch after things, not just the grounds. Anything happens to my girls, he'd say, don't let anyone get swept away. He hated seeing you tossed aside." The words startled her, gentler and warmer than she'd expected. She searched James's face and found only loyalty there, steady and unspoken, but real. "So what do I do?" Emily whispered, voice raw. "Stand your ground. Keep your heart honest, but don't let kindness make you blind." He hesitated, then added, "If you need to know what's spoken in corner shadows, I hear things. You ask, I'll tell." Emotion stung Emily's throat, an unfamiliar rush of gratitude. In a house where family bonds felt paper thin, the knowledge that an outsider believed in her, quietly, patiently, was suddenly everything. Later that day, when Bridget snapped instructions at the staff in the kitchen, Emily intervened where she'd once shrunk away. "Actually, that's not how we'll do things from now on. James, could you help me inventory the storage? I want to review Dad's accounts myself." Bridget stiffened, but James only tipped his cap, a flicker of a smile passing between them. As evening spread across the garden, Rachel joined them under the ancient oak for a simple dinner: sandwiches, lemonade, laughter catching on the soft air. Into a strange quiet, as if holding its breath for whatever might come next. Emily found herself restless, her mind flickering between determination and doubt. The estate's finances were more tangled than she could have imagined, Her sister's alliance held firm, yet even that seemed less certain now, their whispered arguments drifting through the high ceilings late at night. On a whim, she ventured to the attic, a place she had avoided since childhood. The air was thick with dust and old grief, filled with the scent of cedar chests and the forgotten perfume of her mother. She discovered boxes stamped with her father's handwriting, ledgers, letters, rows of faded photographs. Kneeling in the musty half-light, Emily sifted through them, searching for answers, or maybe just some lost piece of herself. She paused at a small stack of envelopes, bound with string brittle from the years. The top one was addressed to her in her father's sprawling hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "My Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, it means life has given you a burden you weren't prepared for. But you're stronger than you think. Don't let the world or your sisters convince you otherwise. Stanton House is more than walls and accounts. It's history and forgiveness and, if you let it, a chance for something new." Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness, but relief. She pressed the letter to her chest, grateful for this last message from him. Dinner that evening was subdued. Veronica was nowhere to be seen. Bridget picked at her food and left 2 bites into the meal. Rachel, sensing Emily's mood, said nothing, only offering a reassuring squeeze of the hand. As shadows deepened, James sought her out on the back porch, a battered umbrella in hand. His presence was grounding, a silent reminder of roots and loyalty. "You've been digging in the attic," he said gently. "Find something important?" Emily nodded, unable to suppress a small, hopeful smile. "A letter from my father. It feels like everything's shifting, but maybe that's not a bad thing." James nodded. The past can warn us. Fight, and James stood silent watch. The Stanton legacy wasn't settled, not yet. But for the first time, Emily welcomed the battle. The rain continued to fall. Beneath its steady rhythm, Emily's new resolve took firmer root, ready for whatever secrets tomorrow might bring. The boardroom reckoning. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived with a crisp chill, autumn announcing itself in gusts that rattled the stained glass windows of the Stanton building. Emily stood at the foot of the grand staircase, adjusting the cuffs of her borrowed blazer. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. For so long, the boardroom was an abstract enemy, a place where decisions happened to her, not by her. That would change today. Rachel crossed the marble foyer and offered a steadying look. "You're ready, Em. Remember, they invited you here. They can't ignore you anymore." They entered the heart of the Stanton Empire, a walnut-paneled room lined with ancestral portraits glaring down in stony judgment. Bridget and Veronica were already seated at the vast table, flanked by gray-haired board members and 2 junior lawyers. Tension coiled in the air as Emily and Rachel took the empty seats at the far end. The chair, Mr. Lawrence, cleared his throat. "We've convened because of significant concerns about the estate's leadership transition. It's clear there are conflicting interests among the heirs." Bridget spoke first, her voice velvet but edged in steel. "It's not just about family squabbles. The company's at risk. Emily is not prepared for operational oversight. We're proposing she cede her voting rights in exchange for an expanded trust. We want what's best for the legacy." Veronica nodded, eyes cool as ice. "We need stability, now more than ever. Dad always said the board must come first." Emily steadied herself, recalling every word of her father's letter and every late-night page Ms. Yates had explained. She slid a prepared statement across the table. With respect, the will names me as legal heir. That wasn't a whim. I know I have much to learn, but nobody knows this family or its values better than I do. I'm not ceding my rights. Rachel slid a folder across the table. An independent audit, evidence that Emily had begun learning the company's operations and uncovering discrepancies overlooked for years. As the members perused the pages, doubt crept into their expressions, not about Emily, but about the status quo under Bridget and Veronica. Mr. Lawrence closed the files. You've given us much to consider, Miss Stanton. We'll vote on the matter, but your resolve has not gone unnoticed. Emily nodded, her hands finally still. I'll abide by the board's decision, but I won't quietly disappear. As they recessed, Bridget's facade cracked ever so slightly, resentment mixed with the flicker of something like respect. Veronica stalked out, slamming her portfolio shut. Rachel squeezed Emily's arm. You did it. Whatever happens next, you stood your ground. Alone in the echoing silence of the boardroom, Emily exhaled, a slow, tremulous breath that carried months of fear out into the autumn air. Whatever reckoning the future held, she faced it with her own voice. At last. Tides. The hours after the board meeting dragged with the slow agony of uncertainty. Emily retreated to her late father's corner office, his heavy mahogany desk littered with blueprints and memos in his familiar scrawl. Outside, the city blurred in the rain, 1,000 lights smudged in the dusk. For the first time, the space felt less like a museum to grief and more like a fortress, still echoing with her father's tenacity. She wrapped her hands around a mug of cooling coffee, staring at the silver-framed photograph on the windowsill. Young Emily stood between her father and two beaming sisters, laughter caught in sunlight. It seemed a lifetime ago. She wondered what that girl would think of the woman she'd become. Rachel's quiet knock broke her reverie. She entered carrying 2 paper bags, takeout scents trailing in her wake. Thought you could use a victory dinner, Rachel said, attempting a smile. If not a victory, at least a distraction. Emily managed a grateful grin, accepting the warm container Rachel handed her. I don't know yet if I want anything. The vote could go either way. You were brave, clear, honest. That counts for something. Rachel replied, settling into the opposite chair. Emily threshold, uncertainty softening the lines of her face. Emily, she began. Can we talk? Rachel glanced at Emily, who nodded. I'll be down the hall, Rachel murmured, departing with a reassuring squeeze on Emily's shoulder. Bridget sat, her movements tentative. The silence stretched until she finally spoke. You surprised me today, Bridget admitted, twining her fingers. I always thought I needed to protect you. Maybe I was wrong. Emily looked her sister in the eye, searching for familiar barbs, but saw only exhaustion, something raw and honest. I don't want to fight, Bridget. Or at least... Emily hesitated. Not for the sake of winning. I want us to be a family again. I want to honor Dad, but not by tearing each other down. Bridget smiled sadly. Dad loved us all. We just couldn't find our way through the anger. Her voice faltered and she blinked away the threat of tears. The board, they're waiting for any sign of weakness. We can't afford it anymore. Emily's resolve grew. Then maybe we find a new way, together. In the waning light, the sisters found themselves not as adversaries, but as survivors of loss. The lines between them, once sharpened by pride and fear, began at last to blur. A fragile alliance, but an alliance all the same. By the time Bridget left, some of the burden on Emily's chest had lifted. She rejoined Rachel in the hall, hope flickering where despair had lived for so long. That night, as rain finally broke and the city's lights sharpened, Emily slept soundly for the first time in months, dreaming not of battles lost, but of tides quietly, irresistibly turning. A legacy rekindled. The sun rose pale and cool over the Stanton estate, painting the world in gentle gold. For the first time in months, Emily woke before her alarm. She lay in bed, marveling at the absence of dread in her chest, a small miracle she treated with careful gratitude. Downstairs, the house was stirring slowly. Warm light filtered through the kitchen as Rachel brewed coffee, whistling a quiet tune. Emily joined her, and they shared a moment of easy silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against porcelain envelope. Emily's fingers trembled as she opened it. The verdict was clear. The board had voted in her favor. Her role as legal heir and acting director was formally recognized. She read the words twice, half in disbelief. Rachel let out a joyful whoop, enveloping her in a tight, laughing embrace. James smiled, the pride in his eyes unspoken but unmistakable. The news worked its way through the house, bringing cautious smiles even to the quietest corners. By mid-morning, Bridget appeared in the doorway, hands in her sweater pockets, guarded but sincere. "I heard," Bridget offered. "Congratulations, Emily. Really." For a moment, the silence threatened to turn awkward, but Emily stepped forward, voice steady. "Thank you. I mean it, Bea. I want you by my side. This house, the business, they're too much for one person. Dad knew that." Bridget's smile was tentative but real. "We'll figure it out together." As the day unfolded, small miracles kept happening. Veronica, subdued but civil, agreed to a meeting about redefining her role. The staff bustled with new energy. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway, silent for years, chimed at noon as if to mark the beginning of something better. In the afternoon, Emily walked the estate grounds with James. The trees swayed in the gentle breeze, the gardens blooming in unexpected color. For the first time, the land felt like home, not a battleground, but an inheritance in the truest sense. Back inside, Emily gathered everyone in the sunlit parlor, family, staff, and Rachel. She spoke plainly, with conviction. "This house is more than stone and memory. It belongs to all of us who have cared for it, built it, fought for it. From today, I want us to remember that, not just as a legacy, but as a future we build together." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Relief, hope, perhaps a little forgiveness. Emily met each gaze, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a certainty that she was no longer carrying it alone. That night, as twilight feathered the